Good morning, security nerds. Congratulations on being out before noon on a Saturday. No, it's tough for most of you. My name's Katherine Scrupa. I have a network technology CCNA. I also got my GIAC GCWN, which is Windows stuff from SANS a couple years ago. And thank you for allowing me to present, and I'm happy to tell you about WMI. As for the title, apologies to Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. That's where that comes from. I've got a quote at the end to finish up the presentation, but yeah, we're going to talk about WMI and CIM today. So I'm not going to tell you anything and everything you would ever need to know about WMI and CIM. I'm going to tell you about, just get you to a point where you feel comfortable with experimenting it and using it for your own purposes. If you're more curious about the red team side of things, there's a really good talk by Matt Graber. His username is Manifestation on Twitter. Gave a talk at BlackCon Black Hat about the Red Hat side of things. So he's a good guy to look up and follow. I think the name of his talk was Abusing Windows Management Instrumentation. So if you've especially delved around on Windows with this type of stuff, there's a heck of a lot of acronyms and it's not clear which is which. So I'm going to go through some of that housekeeping and explain that to you. You may have seen something called DMTF, a Distributed Management Task Force, that's headed up by Microsoft, IBM, Cisco, and others. So they've come together and decided we need this task force to have a standard for accessing a whole bunch of information on a variety of platforms. So that's why they've come together and done this. So yes, they are working together. And the modeling that they came up with is called CIM, CIM. So this is more or less how CIM and WMI are related. WMF is something a little different yet. The common information modeling is the standard of core and common constructs that they want to be used across different platforms. So it's OS agnostic on purpose. The point is you can take that code and run it, or queries and run it on anything. Windows Management Instrumentation is something that extends CIM, so it's Microsoft-specific implementation of CIM. If you look at CIM objects, you can actually see where they were derived from the CIM standard if you know where to look. I'll show you that in a bit. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. The Windows Management Framework is a Windows-specific framework. One of the services it provides is methods to access CIM and WMI, the extended version. It also is the thing that gives you, provides you PowerShell, things like that. So it's a whole management framework. WMI's actually been around since NT4 days, mid-90s, so it's actually been around quite a while. It's a separate install, but it was available. And you've probably seen these acronyms too. I've got a nicer chart on the next screen if this is too much text on a Saturday morning to be thrown at you. Got WebM, Westman, sounds a little rude when you say it that way, WSMan, and WinRM. So the common information modeling, the CIM and the WMI is the data, essentially, that's accessible. A little more complex than that, but you can think of it that way. WebM describes how to access. So it is also OS agnostic. It's based on open standards. Give me a sec. Already starting to lose my voice. So it defines a specification for protocols, mappings, discovery, and query languages. WSMAN is a protocol used for WebM. It is also OS agnostic, but WinRM is essentially Microsoft's version of that. I think a lot of these acronyms, as soon as you see W in front of it, you tend to assume, oh, this is a Windows thing. And in this space, it's not necessarily the case. WinRM is Windows-based, but the other stuff isn't. Oh, and if you're curious about the underpinnings, WebM is REST-based, hence the little chair, and WSMAN is SOAP-based. So if you're doing some sort of packet inspection with Wireshark or playing around with Procmon or something like that, that's what you're looking for. And this might solidify what I was just saying. You've got WebM, which has the mappings, protocol, discovery, query languages. Obviously, this is not a complete chart, but for our purposes, yeah, WSMAN is one of the protocols, and WinRM is Microsoft's specific implementation of that. Depending on what you're calling for CIM or WMI, there's another protocol called DCOM RPC. And that's kind of the older school type. Tends to be, it is the one that WMI itself uses if you're explicitly calling WMI. Yeah. So WMF at this point currently supports CIM version 2 schemas from the DMTF. CIM can either use WSMAN or DCOM RPC, but WMI is DCOM RPC only. Recommend, to make things standardized, try to use CIM queries where you can. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Usually, frankly, we have a problem to solve, we just freaking Google it online and you use whatever someone else might have already come up with to try to understand what it is, right? So you use what works for you, especially while you're learning, but if you want to standardize it, move towards using CIM. So in Windows 7, which is what this talk is going to be concentrating on, people, you'll see online, especially if you've still got Windows 7 boxes running around, they'll say, oh, well, Windows 7, it's only PowerShell 2, and you don't have all of the stuff from that Windows Management Framework. You want to run stuff with PowerShell 5, you should, you're going to have to move to Windows 10. That's actually not true. What is true is you can install the Windows Management Framework 5.1 on a Windows 7 machine. Probably 6 as well, I guess, which came out a little while ago. And you can run PowerShell 5 on a Windows 7 box. I mean, Windows 7 is ending support in January, so you should get off of there, like really, if you can. But if you have to for some reason, you can absolutely install the new Windows Management Framework. It's a whole 64 megabyte download. So it's... yeah, it's totally doable. Yeah, talking about, I'm not going to make this a PowerShell talk per se. That's the most common way you do want to use to interact with this interface. But just if you're not familiar with this whole ecosystem, just be aware you've got something called PowerShell, PowerShell Core, and .NET are kind of all really, they are tightly integrated. So you're kind of using variants of more or less the same thing. So if you're going to delve into that, just be aware that those technologies are all related in Windows. It's a little harder to find information for this on Linux. Linux is old school. It's file-based, files, happy files for everything, right? So Linux kind of doesn't give a damn about Windows stuff, but as you've seen, like some really interesting changes, especially with Microsoft in the last while, all of those vendors are starting to work together in ways that we haven't seen before. I mean, Microsoft bought GitHub, right? Who would have seen that coming 15 years ago? So on Mac, some information I could find. There are some people using Open Management Infrastructure on there. It's basically the free version of this, and it's available on GitHub. There's actually quite a few tools available, WMI based on GitHub for good or nefarious purposes. So if you start looking into this stuff, that's where you're going to end up. Linux, Ubuntu has a lightweight version of it they called CMOM, which you can play around with, or Sublime is the other one. Red Hat has Open Pegasus. To be honest, not really familiar with that. And yeah, this open management framework is an option on other Linux machines. So it is possible to play around with this on other systems. So how do we play with it? PowerShell directly is the recommended method. So if you're not familiar with that, get used to it. You can, if you're not familiar with PowerShell, you can do local targeting, or in a lot of the commands, you can do -computer name and access other computers from your own machine. The .NET system management namespace, because PowerShell and .NET are so tight, you can actually explicitly call .NET things in PowerShell. Or if you're a .NET programmer, you can call it from .NET, obviously. And you'll see a lot of examples, historical examples of WMIC, which is the old kind of first version of this this stuff. It's old school, it's unwieldy, it can do unexpected things, especially if you make assumptions. So it might be okay for you, but please try not to use it if you can help it. One of the funny things I saw in their own environment is someone else had used it for uninstalling MSI packages. And you can't really control, you can't say no reboot if that happens. So if the package figured it was going to reboot, then it would just go ahead and do that without any warning. So as with anything else, you probably want to use the newer tools if you can. Query methods and discovery. So you got WebMTest available right on Windows itself. It's clunky, but it's good if you want to test an actual query. The queries for this are very SQL-like. MMC kind of sucks for browsing, but it does have a use for especially figuring out security and groups and who has access to do what. As I said before, JFGI, just Google it. You are going to find, if you have a problem to solve, you're going to find a lot of examples on Stack Exchange or GitHub. Same with the Hey Scripting Guy website and PowerShell.org. Third-party tools, WMI Explorer. This is one I actually use a lot when I'm trying to get a sense of what else the capabilities are and just the breadth of what you can do with it. It's very much like Windows Explorer, and you can just open up the structure and go through, and you can search in there. If you find something in particular, a class that you're interested in or a property of the class, double click on it, it'll actually generate the WL query for you, which is pretty cool because then you can take that and use it in PowerShell, or if you're doing something like a GPO, you can slap it right in there. Sim Studio used to be a thing, but even though it exists on TechNet, the actual download for it seems to have disappeared recently, so not sure what's going on with that, but it was similar in some ways to WMI Explorer. Here's some of the other goodies on GitHub I was talking about. There's an open asset logger, Impacket, WMI shell. One of those is a proof of concept for accessing things from Linux. And I've got a link there if you want to download the slides later. I've got several links in here that are even in the speaker notes to help you on your way if you want to play around with this stuff. So the structure itself, what time do I have here, guys? Let me know. The structure itself, it's kind of like the twisted love child of a construct of object-oriented programming and a database. Don't get pedantic. I mean, I know we're all good at our jobs because we are pedantic. It's not exactly a database. Yeah, I know. But if you think about it that way, it's easier to grasp this. Being PowerShell, .NET type of stuff, any objects you're going to get back are all object-oriented types. So even if you get text back, it's actually an object. So keep that in mind when you're playing with it, especially if you're coming from the Unix world. So you'll have a SIM provider. There's several SIM providers, but there's basically one you're essentially going to use for pretty much everything. And they're divvied up into classes. And then underneath that, you have the instance of the class. They have properties, they have methods, and they're, in some cases, they were extensible, such as WMI classes. And WMI query language, SIM query language, filter query language are all ways you can use to query this stuff. I am going to show you examples. Oh, hey, there's a timer on my speaker notes that I never noticed before. I'm good. So if you're wondering what all the WMI list objects were, you can grab them in the command line just with get WMI object dash list. That's more or less a representation of what you get back. How readable is that? Yeah, so it'll give you, instead of browsing in WMI Explorer, it'll give you a list of these classes, and being in PowerShell, you can filter. If you're looking for a specific name, you can grab that too. Root/simv2 is basically the namespace you're going to see for stuff. There's like 30 others, but that's where you're going to be living most of the time. You can specify other namespaces, but you're going to be using this one. So you can list the instance of a computer system with get WMI. I've just assigned it to a variable here. The funny thing, PowerShell in particular assumes, oh, if you assign a variable to something and then you go blah, that, just give me that variable, it'll show you like 4 things. There's actually, it assumes, oh, this is probably just the stuff you want. It's not going to show you everything. So if you actually do literally want to know everything that object holds, you need to do something like pipe it to format list star to give you everything. So this is not an exact representation, but this gives you the idea of what's in that type of variable. So anything that DMTF has basically figured, well, in this case, it's WMI, so DMTF and Microsoft have figured should belong to a computer workstation. As the manufacturer, the host name, time zone, they figured is in there. And that's how you can get that stuff. And as I was saying earlier, if you're going, well, wait, this is a WMI thing, what about SIM? Well, that's how you can get an idea of what SIM object it inherits from. So if you look at the derivation property in the variable, you can get a list of what it's derived from. And that way you would know if you wanted to make a similar query from CIM, you can do that. You can also expand, in PowerShell, you can expand that property, just piping it to select object dash expand property derivation, and it'll give you all those. There's a lot more there in those brackets than it appears. Another example, CIM with WQL query. So if you're very used to SQL type queries and you want to live off of that, this is how you can do it. So you can go get CIM instance dash query and then just literally the SQL-like statement. And there's also another command below it in gray that would give you the exact same thing as what you see in blue there at the bottom. Last acronym, maybe, that we're going to deal with is, you might have seen some MOF files floating around on systems. That is related to CIM. It's basically a description of the structure of CIM. You'll also see it if you do any desired state configuration with PowerShell, which seems to be the way PowerShell and everything is going. DSC is Microsoft's version of automation, so it's really? It says 26 minutes on here. So yeah, Chef, Ansible, Puppet. I'm gonna go faster. So story time here, deploying wallpaper to your org. What resolutions do you need? And yeah, you can get that out of WMI. So I used WMI Explorer. I found an example online that wasn't quite the right thing, but I was able to browse to something that's similar there. And then with that, I was able to generate the queries for the WMI objects and values for the video controller. Wrote a script. Results, my code, solve the problem. Another thing to make note of is you'll find solutions online. People say, hey, you need to use this query, but in your own environment it may be different. So if you want more details on that, check out this slide later. Uh-oh. So let me say it again. Yep. What? You jerk. I do not have 5 minutes left.
It's been fixed. It's all good.
Okay. Okay, we're good again. Yes, so this is WMI Explorer. You can browse through here. It's actually quite fun to play in here, especially that second column where you see the green. It is dog slow, and when you run queries, it tends to be dog slow too. The only reason I could find online, which I don't fully understand, it's because of the RPC calls, and it does marshalling for giving stuff back. So to enumerate everything takes a long time. But that's kind of a good case for a practice of making sure that if you do a query on something, get the minimum amount of data you need first, and then filter from there if you have to with your query. You don't want to like grab a huge object of something and then go from there, because that would be a lot longer. We already went over this. So yeah, that Win32 video controller, that had some pretty cool properties to browse in there. It tells you, if you had an inventory system, your inventory probably tells you the make and model of your monitor, or maybe some other stuff, but it probably doesn't tell you how many monitors someone has attached and what resolution they're using. So if you had something like wallpaper you'd want to deploy, you'd want to go, well, what resolution are people using? And that can give you valuable information and insight to other things going in your org. See, now, yeah. Yeah. So this is basically the results of my script, which I put in here. If you get data like this, if you think about your org in this way, you can go, well, why does this guy have like 5 monitors? Is he poaching stuff from somewhere, or is he using multiple computers? Is he being naughty? The other thing this might give you an indication is how many users, like some of us over 40, might have a hard time seeing certain screens. They use a lower resolution. Maybe they're a group you should target for telling about Control plus and minus in web browsers. So there's other ways to use this data you might not have thought of. This is for your use later. I do not expect you to read this, but this is my entire script of grabbing all of the monitor resolutions in our org. This we already went over. Now we get to the fun stuff. So you need to think about this again. Like before I said, WMI is essentially a collection of anything and everything attached to or associated with your computer. And give that another thought. It's a collection of everything. So in the wrong hands, it can do, definitely for recon, it's giving you everything if you have access to it. Not only that, a lot of the objects in WMI and CIM, they have methods too, such as .delete or .create. So think of anything on your machine where evil could happen if you created something or deleted it. Yeah, that might be a little touchy. Hackers love WMI. You do recon for services, processes, so you can filter that, get the owners of the process, you can see who they're running as. All your startup commands, all your network shares, stuff in your computer system. And because you can call you can query other workstations other than the one you are on directly. That's a method of leveraging one system to access another. Outright execution, so you can create whatever and invoke -sim method and call basically whatever the account you're running as has access to. Especially remotely, you have lateral movement here, so that's naughty. Another way of creating a process. Actually, I came upon this when I was researching this. I'm not familiar with this type of calling, but it's a huge thing. You can really do unexpected things and things you've never seen before with it. Next slide's my favorite. Tweak a CPU fan. There is a class, if your motherboard is capable of WMI and CIM stuff, there's a Win32 fan class, and you can set the desired speed. What would happen if you set the desired speed to 0? Yeah, so you can do a lot of evil with this. That would be unfortunate. So that's nice. Now what? How do we protect against this, right? You do want to use PowerShell remoting where you can, especially if you can with certificates. If your IT crew does things in a specified, expected way as securely as possible, then any sort of instant and event monitoring, to look for the other stuff, and that stuff that you guys aren't doing. Or, maybe you are doing and you need to yell at one of your teammates. Nicely, of course. Take care with your username and authentication. Avoid using them in scripts. Use the credential option when you do stuff. So use credential $creds, it'll pop open a window for you to enter in your credentials securely. It's secure-ish. There's technically ways to grab these credentials with .NET runtime calls. So right in the runtime, you can call something with .NET and grab these values, but it's better than the alternative. We're going to assume, and we should be assuming, that you're using, if you want to do this as an administrator, you want to use a local admin account and not a global one where possible. And those accounts should have different passwords. You don't have the same local administrator password for every machine. So use LAPS and set that up in your org. If you take nothing else away from this talk today, just please use LAPS. If you do use the credential variable, you should destroy it as soon as you don't need it. So get rid of it, remove the variables, set it to null. Standard good programming practice, right? For anything sensitive. Authenticate with Kerberos. You can set on specific accounts for the account to use Kerberos AES of some value encryption, and you should do that where you can. I think it doesn't work with Windows Vista and earlier. Hopefully you're beyond that, but just be aware to set some of this stuff up, you're going to need to do some legwork. This is not a comprehensive step-by-step of what you need to do, right? I'm just giving you guys ideas. You folks, you people, you ladies. Sorry. Use SSL when connecting with WSMan. So there's this SSL option, and that's how you set it. So I've got the example there. Yeah, you set a variable to new SIM session, use SSL, and in the new SIM session, one of the tags you put on it is your session option. When you're using DCOM RPC instead, so when you're using WMI queries, RPC is encrypted by default, but if you explicitly want to make sure it is, you should use -packet privacy. So that MMC console that's available in Windows, there's a WMI provider in there, and that's where you can set up other security values. You can see the guides at that link there. Microsoft has gotten pretty good making good use of GitHub, so a lot of their stuff we'd only see with Java when it came out, where they'd give away their, what's the word? Infrastructure API basically for free. Microsoft is doing that, so they're getting pretty good at detailing these things. And you want to verify that the correct users and groups have access, so that's what you can use that MMC console for. And again, apologies to the writers of Good Omens, and you can think of WMI as, from the book, an angel who did so much as fall as saunter vaguely downwards. So that's WMI for you, CIM, and I hope I've given you guys, you folks, some takeaways to play around with and get comfortable with, and that's it for today.